We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. William Shakespeare, The Tempest. This interview that I, Dr. Jemison Neruda, conducted with Sarah exposes a fundamental deception that affects humanity across every dimension of life. This deception is that our three-dimensional reality and human consciousness have been programmed to be perceived as real, when they are not. This is clearly a very bold assertion, and is not made lightly. In this interview, I explain the forces behind this deception, what their agenda is, how humanity has been enslaved from its inception to today, and what we can do about it. It is, understandably, an unsettling narrative. After all, it exposes a reality where humans are biological hosts of infinite beings, suppressed by deceptive programs designed by entities from a different dimension. Humanity is unaware that we live in a designed reality, and that designed reality includes everything. Over the past 15 years, there have been individuals who have written and spoken about certain aspects of this deception. From the scientific community, individuals like Herman Verlinde, Dr. Robert Lanza, Leonard Susskind, Gerard T. Hooft and James Gates. From the technical field, NASA engineer Thomas Campbell. From a more philosophical perspective, authors like Nick Bostrom and Anthony Peake. Scientific papers, too, have been released in this emerging field of reality definition like Constraints on the Universe is a Numerical Simulation by Beam, Devuti and Savage. These individuals, and others like them, are hypothesizing that our universe was designed through mathematics or computer code. This topic is relatively off-limits, reserved for theoretical and heretical thinkers. It shocks people significantly more than the discussions of UFOs or government conspiracies, because it is so fundamental. It is our reality, and the only logical conclusion we can draw is that we are prisoners in a deceptive reality. It makes reality feel like a lab, and we are the unsuspecting lab rats. From the spiritual side, many of our mystics and religious founders have reported that both our perception of the universe and the universe itself is an illusion. This theme is consistent in religious and spiritual writings throughout the ages. And while the mystics lack the scientific vocabulary to define the scope of this illusion, they nevertheless understood that we, as individuals, walk our lives through an illusory world that scientists are increasingly describing as a programmed reality. The question that rises to the top is, who or what is programming our reality and why? It is to this question that this interview seeks to answer and explain in layperson terms. It is understandable that those with a scientific or religious training will find this disclosure difficult, if not impossible, to believe. I am not trying to convince anyone. I merely present a narrative for how this happened, why it happened, where it is trying to lead humanity, and most importantly, how we can break out of the programming, all of us. This interview is not concentrated on the scientific realm. The science behind the hologram of deception is not based on the mathematics or physics of our spacetime. Its complexity and sophistication is well beyond our current understanding, so the attempt to define it in scientific terms would be an impossible undertaking. Even if it were possible, it would only muddle the real import of this information in arcane vocabulary and mathematics. The true focus of this interview isn't the scientific definition of the hologram of deception, but rather how we can free ourselves from its pervasive and illusory presence. The sovereign integral process is defined in this interview in detail, but you may have to listen carefully to it and understand it. This process is truly the centerpiece of this interview. Whatever philosophical perspective you wish to attach to this information, bear in mind that it is shared in the spirit of oneness and equality, and that the sovereign integral process is a decidedly experiential practice. As thought-provoking as the backstory and the chessboard of reality, as depicted herein, may appear, it is the behavioral adjustments that are the real purpose of this disclosure. The wingmakers' materials are not focused on knowledge or spiritual experiences. They are dedicated to the new behaviors that support the ongoing unfoldment of the sovereign integral process on Earth within the human species. It is this process that you are really experiencing in this interview. Whether you believe in the existence of the hologram of deception or not, the sovereign integral process remains available as a tool to use in your daily life.
What we discussed Wednesday night has been swirling around me ever since. I think I've become a bit obsessed with all of this, what for me, anyway, is new information. I'm trying my best to process it into my mental framework, and I have to admit, I'm not sure it's working.
I understand. I've held back some information for this very reason, not only for you, but also for those who will ultimately hear this.
When we ended the last session, we agreed to spend more time on the Grand Portal. Is that what you're referring to, or is it something else?
It's all related. It's a very, very big picture and broad timeline.
Can you share it now?
Let's take it one part at a time. With your questions, I hope it will all come clear, but I have to warn you that it will seem a little unwieldy or odd until the whole of it is out.
Okay. Where do you want to start?
I think we need to go back to the beginning to understand the true context of the Grand Portal. The Grand Portal is defined in the Wingmakers' materials as the irrefutable, scientific discovery of the human soul.
Okay.
Earth was, and is, a very unique planet. It was entirely of water, originally. But what made it interesting to beings was the fact that its core enabled it to have a gravitational force that supported manifestation.
What do you mean by manifestation?
That it began to traverse from an interdimensional planet of sound frequencies to a planet of matter, a physical matter. Its gravity-producing core, or nucleus, was able to literally create the conditions that allowed it to materialize itself over eons of time.
How do you know this history?
There are records of this on the disk that was taken from the 23rd chamber at the ancient Arrow site. But some of this we knew from other documents we've retrieved from the Sumerian record that have not been widely distributed. We've also had discussions with the Quarian that bear this out.
So Earth started out as a water planet and it wasn't physical?
Correct. This was when the Atlanteans lived within the planet. They were the race of beings that inhabited Earth at the time of its formation. The Anunnaki came to them and negotiated an agreement to allow the Anunnaki to mine a substance near the core of the planet. That would be, in its essence, what today we would call gold. These races of beings known as the Atlanteans and Anunnaki were not three-dimensional. They didn't possess bodies as we think of them today. Their existence was contained in a different range of frequencies, what we would call higher dimensional frequencies.
Why did they want gold?
The Anunnaki required it. The exact reason is unknown, but it had something to do with the way that gold modulated the frequency of their body. Gold was an essence to their race. It held a property that was vital to their survival. The record is a little vague as to exactly why it was so important. But these records mention that their entire planet had 12 major cities, and all of them were made of a semi-transparent gold. Even the Book of Revelations refers to this.
Who are these beings? I mean, I've heard of the Atlanteans, but never the Anunnaki.
They're a race of trans-dimensional beings. The Atlanteans were the only race of beings on Earth at that time, and they, the Anunnaki, sought permission to set up mining on Earth, which the Atlanteans agreed to. The ancient Arrow site is known within the Wingmakers' materials as the extraterrestrial time capsule that was discovered in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico.
Why?
They didn't see any harm in helping the Anunnaki. They weren't a competitor, because the Atlanteans were more numerous. The Atlanteans wanted to have an agreement with the Anunnaki, if only to befriend them for their technology. Also, the gold mining was in an area of Earth that was of little consequence to them.
I don't see how this relates to the Grand Portal.
It's a long story, and we just started, but I promise I'll come to that in a bit.
Okay, that's fine. I'll be patient.
The Earth began to materialize more and more. It began to harden in a sense. The gold with it. The Earth, and everything on it, was solidifying. The mining of the gold would soon become impossible for the Anunnaki, because they'd be unable to mine the gold if it were in a dense, physical state.
Why not?
Their bodies were etheric. They could not mine the gold if it was physical. They needed to have bodies that would be able to operate on Earth and mine the gold.
How quickly did this happen?
I don't know. Our records don't stipulate the time scale, but I assume it was over tens of thousands of years. The point is that they needed to create a physical vessel like an astronaut would require a spacesuit to inhabit space. They tried hundreds of experiments and had the help of both the Atlanteans and Syrians.
I assume this vessel is the human body?
Yes, we call them physical uniforms sometimes. The wingmakers refer to them as human instruments.
So the Anunnaki created a physical body to mine gold. You mean like a robot, or are you saying these were humans?
No. These were the equivalent of ape men. They were pre-human by a long shot. But they were our predecessors. We sometimes refer to them as Human 1.0.
But were they robots or biological?
They were completely biological, but Human 1.0s were not fully physical. They were partly etheric. You see, the Anunnaki and Syrians designed them to synchronize with the evolving densification of the Earth. So as the Earth solidified, so did the human instruments.
If they were biological, did they have a soul?
We wouldn't call them human if they did that. Remember I mentioned the Atlanteans?
Yes.
The Anunnaki and Syrians placed them, the Atlanteans, inside these human uniforms. These were very advanced beings, but apparently naive.
They wanted to be in these ape men bodies and mine gold?
No, that was not their interest at all. In fact, they allowed the Anunnaki to mine their gold, but as the Earth began to solidify, they told them that if they could engineer a vessel to enable them to continue to mine their gold, that would be acceptable, but on a small scale. The Anunnaki had some kind of a falling out with the Atlanteans, and began to conspire with the Syrians and another race referred to as the Serpents. Each of these three races was interested in figuring out how to embody physical planets. They saw Earth as a laboratory of sorts to figure it out. The Anunnaki already had a human uniform. They simply needed to power it with a life source or soul. The bigger issue was how to get the Atlanteans into these embodiments, and keep them there. In effect, these three races conspired to enslave the Atlanteans within these pre-human vessels. The Atlanteans were the power generators that made these biological entities operate.
Are you saying these primitive ape men had powerful souls inside them? I don't understand how that'd be possible.
It's a very complicated subject. The wingmakers wrote about the implantation of programs inside the human uniform, even version 1.0. The Syrians were mostly credited with this invention, but it was the offspring of Anu that really perfected these implants by programming them. The human uniform, version 1.0, was designed by the Anunnaki. The implants were designed by the Syrians, and the programming of the implants was designed and evolved by a being known as Marduk. Anu was the leader of the Anunnaki. He was known as the sky god in Mesopotamian times. The Anunnaki were the deities written about in the Sumerian text, known as the royal blood.
That doesn't answer my question as to how a powerful soul would suddenly be plugged into an ape-man vessel and behave like a Neanderthal.
Well, first, these were much more primitive than Neanderthals. But the answer is in the implants. You see, the biological entity or ape-man, as we're referring to it, was not able to operate in the physical world. They needed survival skills, how to eat, how to hunt, how to clean themselves, how to even move their bodies. All of these very fundamental functions were necessary to actually include or program into the vessel, which was the purpose of the functional implants. The implants were akin to the brain of the human 1.0, but it wasn't just in the brain. These implants were placed inside the body within various parts, like the chest area, middle back, wrists, ankles and so forth. The primary ones were contained in the skull. But generally these implants were networked to operate from the head or brain area.
Why do you say the head or brain area and not simply the brain?
Because it wasn't in the brain. Remember that human 1.0 was still part etheric and part physical. The implants also needed a similar consistency or sound vibration. They were placed into the bone or skeletal structure mostly, and some in the muscle tissue. These functional implants fused into the muscles and bone, including the DNA. The wingmakers put it this way. The DNA integration was for the intelligence of the plan. The muscle tissue allowed the life essence to power the functional implant. There was a central coordination point, and that was in the brain, but the implants were located throughout the body. This was an integrated system that was installed in the human uniform to allow it to be controlled, monitored, and programmed over time. It was the evolutionary stick and carrot. Doing it this way allowed the early humans to dig out gold, which, as I said, was their primary purpose, initially.
I'm sorry to sound like a broken record, but I still don't get how such an advanced race as the Atlanteans could power these ape men and become slaves. It doesn't make sense to me.
You have to understand that the implanted functionality was partly to make the human 1.0 and its power source, the life essence of an Atlantean, to function efficiently and effectively as miners. That was the prime goal. The second, however, was to suppress the power source, or in this case, the Atlantean beings inside the human vessels. They did this by making the power source ignorant of its origin, and the reality of its true expression, as an infinite being. When the Atlantean beings were placed inside the human uniform, they were essentially 100% focused on physical survival and functional performance. There were no relationships, no marriage, no reproduction. These were essentially cloned beings. They were all the same in terms of their appearance and abilities. Human drones, piloted by implanted functionality that the Atlantean beings inside became associated with as them. The infinite inside the body believed it was the body and the implanted functionality, and nothing more.
What happened when they died?
Let me be clear. These beings, the Atlanteans, were infinite, meaning they did not have space-time regulation. They lived after the body died. However, the Anunnaki created a set of planes, or dimensions of experience, that was the equivalent of a holding plane. That's what the wingmakers called it, where they could be recycled.
Recycled? As in reincarnation?
Yes, later on this became the basis of reincarnation. It allowed the Anunnaki to recycle the Atlanteans. Some aspects of the implanted functionality were interdimensional, which is to say, it could assist in the delivery of the beings to the proper location within the holding planes of consciousness, and assist in their reincarnation back into a new vessel.
But you said that the ape men didn't have reproduction?
Not in version 1.0. These were very basic. But the Anunnaki could create them in large scale, so when one human uniform expired, let's say they had a mining accident, another would be made. These were clones. The ability to self-reproduce came in version 2.0. That was mostly because the amount of effort required to manage this process was enormous on the part of the Anunnaki. They wanted to create an automated system, something that wouldn't require them to orchestrate all of the variables. So the Syrians helped them to create the implants that could propagate through reproduction. This enabled the automation of the recycling of the beings from the holding planes to be born into the physical dimension through a baby.
So, this was all automated by programming technology? I don't know, this is too weird.
The universe is made up of dimensions that are a result of mathematical equations. It is constructed from mathematics. Some beings understand how to apply mathematical equations to organize and plan space-time. It's all created. This world is created, it's not real. It's a programmed reality. When I say plan, it can also be construed as control of space-time. That is to say, this is a programmed space-time reality. Once you can program space-time reality within a species like humanity, you can program at the individual level of a person right down to when they itch their nose. If you want to. It's all mathematical equations.
I don't know what to say. For now, I'll go along with you, but it really sounds like fiction to me. So, what happened to the ape men?
I mentioned Marduk. He was intimately involved in the evolution of the species. That was his role. Of all the Anunnaki, he was the closest to the human 1.0s. He understood them and even admired certain aspects of them. Unconsciously, perhaps, he began to alter their programs so the human 1.0s behaved more like the Anunnaki. As they began to take on the characteristics of the Anunnaki, Anu and his sons, Enki and Enlil, were concerned by this. Marduk was programming emotions and feelings. He was evolving humans too quickly, but remember, this was the evolution of the functional implants, the interface between the power source, Atlanteans, and the human physical body. So it was the interface that was being evolved, which enabled the human body to show emotion, to communicate, to sense more of the three-dimensional world called Earth, etc. The other thing that was happening was that as the Earth continued to become more of a three-dimensional solid, so did the human 1.0s and their functionality implants. This growing densification also made it easier to control and suppress the Atlantean power source inside the human uniforms. It was like a compression was taking place in and on this Earth plane, and it was deepening the gravity of focus on Earth plane survival.
I wrote down the word serpents. Are you talking about literal serpents?
No, serpents as a race of beings. They simply were another race of beings based on reptilian DNA, but distinct from the Anunnaki. You could say they were related. They were known as life carriers. They seeded planets. They built food chains. You could say they were the grocers of the planet.
But they didn't get involved in the creation of the human 1.0?
Not in the technical sense. Their job was more to provide food and sustenance for it.
I understand how the Atlanteans were suppressed in the human 1.0 because of the implants, but why did they go there? If they didn't volunteer as you suggest, how did they get forced into slavery when they were previously these powerful, sovereign beings?
We don't know exactly how it happened. The record we read was not specific on this topic. But the tone, or word that was used, was that the Atlanteans were naive. They had no reason to think it would be possible to become enslaved. It would be like a concept that was never used in their culture. No one ever did that, nor could they. You can't enslave an infinite being, unless, of course, you lock them into a human uniform. And that was the cunning of the Anunnaki and their Syrian partners. They launched this attack from such a bizarre angle that the Atlanteans couldn't see it coming. I think it was an ambush or surprise attack.
You said earlier that the human 2.0 could reproduce. How long of a time existed between 1.0 and 2.0, and what were their primary differences?
Human 1.0 rose to a pretty high level in terms of being able to speak or communicate. That was the major add-on that Marduk brought to human 1.0. However, the psychological state of being a clone was too hard for human 1.0. They all looked alike and had the same thoughts, so communication was helpful to a point, for example, coordinating a task, but actually having individual ideas no. And this led to depression and psychological states where, according to the wingmakers, they literally went mad. This flaw was a huge problem. Anu decided to wipe them out, and this is the story of the Great Flood. Marduk managed to save some of the human 1.0s from the flood along with other flora and fauna, but it was the end of human 1.0. Human 2.0 was then created. This was the stage where the humans could self-reproduce. And when this happened, some of the Anunnaki impregnated female humans and brought in their bloodlines to the human species. This began the variations. This began the idea that humans were no longer clones. The concern, however, was that human 2.0s might become too powerful and self-aware. What if the Atlantean power source became aware that it was an infinite being? This was when Anu decided that he should be God. Humans needed to have a lord or ruler over them, so it was clear that they were inferior to an external ruler. This was a key part of their program of indoctrination. Working with Marduk and the Syrians, they created the environment of Eden and created the paradigm of Eve as the instigator of the fall of humanity. This was, you might say, Act 1 of Anu as God. It was staged to provide the human 2.0s with a clear sense of an external authority, and that they were expelled from paradise because they tried to be self-realized. It was like rebuking humanity with the fist of an angry creator who wanted his creation to remain identified with their human uniform. Kind of like saying, do not think for a moment that you can be like me.
And the wingmakers wrote that this actually happened kind of like the Bible said?
Yes.
So the God of the Bible is this Anunnaki Lord, called Anu?
Yes.
Why are you telling me this all now? It seems like this information changes some of the previous information you've shared.
To really understand the Grand Portal, you have to understand this evolutionary process, and the only way you can understand it is to go back to the beginning of the human race.
So why did Anu want to be God?
Remember that the original goal was the acquisition of gold. But when the Atlanteans rejected Anu, he began to conspire with the Syrians. It was just before the flood that Anu discovered that the gold he mined was sufficient. He didn't require more. However, the notion of being a god over the Atlanteans was seductive. The Syrians and serpents felt that the idea of enslaving infinite beings and planet ecosystems was their invention. They had something that was totally unique. They were creator gods, and every other race could be ensnared in a similar type of vessel. They began to do just that.
You mean enslave other races?
Yes. You see, the Earth had a unique quality to its core. This core was of extreme interest to the Anunnaki when they first visited Earth. It was this core that created the gravitational field that enabled the planet to become fully physical in such a way that it could support physical life. Of course, other conditions needed to be present, too, but it was this core that was the real key. Working with the Syrians and serpents, they began to do the same enslavement on other planets. They replicated the core of Earth and engineered a method for implanting this core on other planets. They were essentially terraforming a planet by cloning and installing Earth's core.
So I guess the real question is, if you believe this, what are humans today? Are we simply more of the same? Are we human 2.0?
When I said the human uniform evolves, it does, but this evolution is on a track, a pre-programmed track. The intent was to have Anu return on a cloud. The whole second coming was going to be the stage entrance for Anu. Humanity would evolve in such a way that his re-entry into our consciousness would be understood to be a good thing. Humanity's salvation. We would all be his children, and the glory of God would be upon the earth. That was the plan. From before the time of Jesus, that was the plan. Marduk programmed the entire.
How long can these beings live?
Again, the beings like Marduk or Enki or Anu are not based in space-time. They are infinite beings, meaning they have no end. They don't have an age. Neither do we.
I'm trying to wrap my mind around all of this, but I'm finding it very hard to believe that human beings are simply uniforms for a programmed existence.
Let me go back to your previous question about what humanity is now. The functional implants of the human interface are perfectly integrated within the human vessel. They operate seamlessly. So seamlessly, we do not know that they are not us. We have no choice in the way. We think our thoughts and emotions are us, that this space-time is what our thoughts and emotions exist in. Even the thought of the God, heaven, hell, soul, masters, all of these things, they are part of the program. It is integrated in both the dimension of the earth plane and the afterlife. The afterlife is part of the deception.
Tell me more about this interface and its functional implants.
The I brain was the key element that the Anunnaki needed to design to make the functional implants operate. This is in Human 1.0. In Human 2.0 it was the DNA. Once this was achieved, the Syrians could design the consciousness framework, the human consciousness. Human consciousness is the key to suppressing an infinite being. Human consciousness, or the triad of consciousness, is composed of three interactive layers. The first layer is universal mind or unconscious, and this forms the link between the individual human and the entire species. This layer is what enables all of us to see what everyone sees, feel what everyone else feels, know what everyone else knows. It is the perfect way to unify a species in separation. In fact, that is the way we feel unification, through the unconscious mind. The next layer of consciousness is the genetic mind, as the wingmakers refer to it, or subconscious, in the case of Sigmund Freud. This forms the link between the individual and their family tree or genetics. This is where bloodlines are expressed. And then there is the conscious mind. This is the unique individual perception and expression, what most of us call our personality and character, which is built on this layer. The conscious mind of the individual is heavily influenced by the genetic mind, especially between birth and the age of 7 or 8. By that time the influence is all-encompassing. Remember that the Anunnaki created the biological form, the body, the Syrians created the functional implants, and Marduk executed the programming of these functional implants so they would evolve along a programmed path, leading to the return of Anu. This was expressed in the hierarchical structure of humanity that speaks of God and masters in religious and esoteric texts. This was all part of the design, to create various religions and esoteric cults that would support a vast hierarchy and order the human species into master-student relationships, and then create a multi-leveled afterlife that would reward those who believed and were obedient to their god or masters. You see, the whole principle that was behind this entire endeavor could be summed up in one word: separation. Everything exists in separation, within the earth plane and its afterlife planes as well. But, according to the wingmakers, what is real is that we are all imbued with equality and oneness, not through the unconscious mind, which only links us in separation, but rather through the life essence that is us. And this life essence is sovereign and integral. It is I and we are. No one is above, no one is below. No one is better, no one is lesser.
But you're saying everything is a lie? Everything, I mean everything we've been taught to believe in, is a deception. How is that possible, or even believable?
It's possible because the beings that have enslaved humanity designed a world, to which we adjusted over eons of time. We evolved into it in such a manner that we became lost in our world. The veils that have been placed over us are opaque. So much so that people operate as human uniforms, unaware that everything around them is illusory. It is a programmed reality that is not real. The wingmakers say everything is simply sound, holographically organized to look real.
It's depressing.
Only when you consider the scope of the deception and the way in which humanity has allowed it to rule their behaviors. The good news is that you're hearing about this now.
It doesn't feel like good news.
Each person can step out of the illusion. There is no master here. No God is going to come down and make it happen for us. No ETs. No one. It is each of us. This is what is meant by I am. I, it's like one. One, me, and one, all of us unified. Am, meaning exists now. In this moment. Not in history or memory. Not in some future time or goal. Now.
It doesn't feel real to me. I was raised a Christian. I have no reason to believe that Jesus was an inside agent for this plan of deception.
I'm not saying he was. Many of those who have come to earth as human teachers have tried to reveal how deep and broad and high this illusion has been made. It is as far as the edge of the universe and as close as your DNA. Everywhere in between is illusion. Jesus came to reveal much of this, but the writers of the Bible decided what would be acceptable within the paradigm of life as we humanly know it. They elected to make Jesus a part of the deception. They saw it was time for a redefinition of God to accommodate an evolving human 2.0. God was suddenly a loving father, and all of humanity was brother and sister.
So you're saying Jesus was aware of this deception, but his words weren't included in the Bible?
Our opinion was that his words were so against the conditioned beliefs that people could not understand them as he said them. And so, over time, they were translated into the form you know them today. The biblical translations simply lack the original potency with which he said them. Besides, there are two methods that can make exposing this illusion a very difficult proposition.
What do you mean?
The first is that the unconscious mind system is inside everyone. It's like a field of information that everyone can access. It can affect or infect everyone. A revelatory idea can be passed to a small number of people, but it lacks sufficient influence to generate mass awakening. So there's unconscious mind inertia. The other, and this is more pernicious, is that the functional implants are programmed, and like any program, they can be upgraded or even turned off.
As I listen to this story, I feel a little overwhelmed at how to proceed with the interview. I'm not sure what to ask or what direction to take things. If I look at my notes, I see my handwritten note, "There is no God." Is this really what you're saying?
The wingmakers refer to the triad of consciousness as having the God consciousness installed within it, in the unconscious mind layer. But they also report that as the individual develops from about the age of 6 or 7, they begin to assemble their individual personality from the elements of the subconscious layer. By the time they're 12 to 14 years old, they have their unique personality well in place. For some, this uniqueness is shutting out the existence of a God. From Anu's perspective, this is fine. He probably likes having atheists and agnostics. It's more separation, more diversity. In fact, the greater the diversity in the human family, the greater the separation. The greater the separation, the easier it is to keep the program of enslavement intact. Choose sides and disagree with your opponents. Compete. It fuels wars and social unrest. As for the existence of God, we, collectively, are the closest thing to God. We are. That's the clear message of the wingmakers. There is a first source, the creator of the life essence, a center point in existence that created the framework of existence through sound.
But what about the ones who are enlightened or spiritual masters? They're all made up.
No, it's not that they're made up. They exist. It's just that their existence is within the human interface or functional implants. They exist there. We, us, the being that is I am, that being is not of that reality. It doesn't really exist inside the holographic stage that was created by interdimensional beings millions of years ago. Rather, it is being used as a power source that animates the human interface or uniform. Over time, we've spiraled deeper and deeper inside of this created world, complete with its afterlife and different planes of existence. You could look at it this way: Anu installed a program inside the human 2.0, and in this program, humans would evolve from knowing absolutely nothing about their world to knowing God. Humans were designed to have God consciousness, meaning to have the same understanding and awareness as Anu. But then Anu took this evolutionary line and positioned God consciousness so far out into the future that humans would essentially be chasing this God consciousness forever. They'd be chasing shadows, because until they awaken from the deception, the only God that exists in that world is Anu. Once awakened as I am, we are, or the sovereign integral, a human being lives as an expression of this consciousness. According to the wingmakers, no one has achieved this at this time. It is, however, our future to live in this consciousness in a human instrument.
No one has done this. You mean anywhere?
On this plane, Earth, no one has done this. But remember, the wingmakers are human in a future time. They have returned to our time to crack the shell open a bit. They have traveled to our time to remind us of what they discovered. They left this enslavement, so we will do it.
But you already said that space-time is an illusion.
That's true. It is, but it's hard to imagine that the universe in which we exist is really a hologram projection that was programmed inside our unconscious mind, and we're really inside this hologram, wearing a human uniform that was outfitted to perceive only this hologram. The wingmakers say that the real world is sound. Everything is sound and resonance of sound. Everything we have in our human uniform for sensing our universe is millions of years of evolutionary design to tune into that hologram and only that hologram.
How does that hologram extend beyond this physical world then? You said even the afterlife is part of it.
There are many aspects to the afterlife. There is God, first and foremost. There is the light of illumination. There is the universal spirit and individual soul. There is a hierarchy of angels and masters. There is the concept of karma and reincarnation, or sin and salvation. The concept of heaven and hell. The concept of the chosen. The concept of an ascension path. The concept of the Book of Records or Akashic Records. All of these concepts were designed into an upgrade of the Human 2.0 interface. Certain human beings are programmed to find these concepts in their unconscious mind layer, and share them. As a result, religions sprout. Philosophies rise, sometimes in support of the religions, sometimes in contradiction. Esoteric cults rise. All the while the human being remains lost. It remains muddled in its illusion. Everything tied to an empty promise and a belief, and in all those beliefs, one thing remains constant: separation. The program is vast in its reach, and the Anunnaki, once they had mined sufficient gold, had an entire race of beings enslaved. Anu, along with his allies, in the Syrian and Serpent races, decided it would be best to turn the human 2.0s into a worthless creature that forever sought enlightenment through belief. And who do you suppose would provide the things to believe in? Anu and Marduk. Everything became learning lessons. The earth was a schoolhouse. If you learn your lessons, you won't have to keep incarnating. Learn, learn, learn. But what are you learning? You're learning to believe in the afterlife, as it was described and prescribed by Anu and his designers. You're learning to don your human uniform obediently. You're learning to discern how humanity is different. You're learning to link every self-image you have to the world of 3 dimensions, while hoping there is more after death. The sober reality is that after you die, the being inside you is met by a guardian who will take you to your destination, based mostly on your deeds in this life. However, most beings are taken to a life review where you face your life in every detail, and based on that experience an authoritative figure will prescribe your next life options for reincarnation. You are essentially recycled into the same program with a new mother and family, and a programmed life path is laid out for you to follow. The afterlife program and process is all part of the master program to retain the enslavement of the beings. Remember, we're interdimensional beings, meaning we exist in 3D in the higher planes. It's just that these higher planes are designed by the Anunnaki. They are not of the real dimensional planes. Otherwise, we would die, discover who we really are, and we would never reincarnate, or if we did, we would tell everyone on Earth that this is all an illusion.
Why? Why do it this way? It doesn't make sense.
What began as an experiment, in 3-dimensional exploration, from a higher dimensional reality, became what is here. Every human being will confront this reality eventually. It cannot be avoided. We can agonize about the lack of fairness or ask why, but whether it makes sense to you doesn't change the fact that we live in a world of design separation. Divide and conquer. The wingmakers write of the tone vibration of equality. 1 second, I have the papers. Here's the exact choice of words by the wingmakers. When all manifestations of life are genuinely perceived as fragmentary expressions of first source, the vibration of equality that underlies all life forms becomes perceptible to the human instrument. Life initially emerges as an extension of source reality, and then, as an individuated energy frequency, invested within a form. It vibrates, in its pure, timeless state, precisely the same for all manifestations of life. This is the common ground that all life shares. This is the tone vibration of equality that can be observed within all life forms, that unifies all expressions of diversity, to the foundation of existence known as First Source.
It's so abstract. How does it help?
Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But the thing is, to change, to step out of this illusion, it requires each of us to wake up and stay awake. It's not reading words that will change this. It's the profound nature of new behaviors, because these behaviors signal that our consciousness layers are understood as separate from who we really are. We have to operate as I am, we are.
Where does the incunabula or Illuminati belong in this narrative?
In the triad of power, the incunabula is the capstone, also known as the capstone of the elite. I'll answer that later. I want to continue the story a little further.
Okay.
Human 2.0s and Earth continue to densify. We become increasingly three-dimensional. We are actually denser now than we have ever been, in terms of physicality. There was a time, about 40 years ago, when we thought alien races were actually leaving spaceships behind on purpose, but what we discovered, more recently, is that most of the aliens were not physical beings. They were observing Earth, and their spaceships actually became entrained by the gravitational circuits of the Earth's core, which caused their spaceships to materialize in three-dimensional space. Because many of the materials used in the ship's construction had chemical properties, they were prone to densification when exposed to Earth's atmosphere.
You mentioned the Earth's core as being the cause of all of this. What's so special about it?
The magnetic fields associated with Earth's core are unique. They are, in the words of the wingmakers, alive. We can only assume that alive is an aspect of intelligence. The point in this, however, is that everything's densifying. It is compressing. It is compressing for a reason. The old systems can fall in unison when density reaches a certain critical mass. And that is what will happen.
When?
All I can say is that it is soon. I don't want dates and times associated with it.
But do you know?
We know a range.
More than 10 years?
Yes.
More than 20 years?
All I will say is that the wingmaker's term for this is SIN, or the Sovereign Integral Network. SIN is the definition of the new system. They said it can come in an instant once the right conditions are in place. What is unclear is how SIN develops after the grand portal in Human 3.0.
That's the first time you've mentioned Human 3.0. What is it?
If human beings are trapped in a prison of illusion, as Human 2.0s, and their interface to the holographic universe is the reason for their being trapped, then a new model needs to step forward. Human 3.0 is this new model. It is the formula of self-realization. It is stepping out of the constructed universe or reality, and living as a self-expression of I am, we are. Human 3.0 is the sovereign integral. I call it Human 3.0 SI. You see, the Grand Portal is a way to synchronize humanity to a new inception point where it is living in the expression of oneness and equality, sovereign and integral, I am and we are. It is a way for humanity to move from separation, which was its previous inception point, the one that generated Human 1.0 and 2.0. Human 3.0 SI will have a new inception point, and the reason for the Grand Portal was to enable synchronization, because how can you have a network of equality and oneness if the beings were not synchronized?
What is soul, then?
Soul is an idea or paradigm that has become part of the human reality program. Soul is the part of you that contains all memory of your existence as a human 1.0 and 2.0. For most of us, this is a vast repository, far too large for the consciousness framework to deal with. So the soul holds this information for each individual being. Soul is a paradigm of infinite expression within a finite reality. But you can't be infinite in a finite reality, if that reality is a programmed reality. So soul is not the life force that powers the human consciousness. That is the sovereign integral. That is what each of us is when we are stripped naked of all illusion, of all deceptions, of all limitations, of all veils, of all functional implants, including the soul. It is the redefinition of human identity and expression as I am, we are. From a human perspective, the wingmakers do not see humans as lesser entities, but simply beings with inception points that enslave them. It is not a judgment that humans are worthless or bad or sinful or weak or needy. None of those things. Humanity needs a new start. A point in which they can synchronize in one realization, and that is the expression of I am, we are. Living those words as behavior.
Where's the creator of Anu, the real God? How can we be allowed to live and operate in this kind of deception?
The wingmakers talk about the transformation mastership model. Hold on. I have the page here. This is how they put it. The time has come to integrate the dominant model of the hierarchy evolution saviorship with the dominant model of source intelligence, transformation mastership. This integration can only be achieved at the level of the entity. It cannot occur within the context of a human instrument or an aspect of the hierarchy. Only the entity, the wholeness of interdimensional sovereignty imbued with source intelligence, can facilitate and fully experience the integration of these two models of existence.
So what does that have to do with my question?
Each individual being is responsible for this. God or source intelligence isn't going to come down from the heavens and correct human faults or obstacles. Humans need to take responsibility for this.
But seriously, how? We're wrapped in so many layers of deception.
It's not easy. The wingmakers write about the hard virtues as the behavioral construct for this time, and how these words can be applied and lived, not simply held in the head as a worthy concept.
I don't think you've mentioned these before. What are they?
Appreciation or gratitude, compassion, humility, forgiveness, understanding and valor or courage. It is the combination of nowness, being in the now, and applying these words in our behaviors. It's being impeccable in this practice.
What happens if you do?
The unconscious mind is a doorway into all beings. These behaviors go out to all beings. They support the building of the sovereign integral network, Human 3.0, which is the replacement of separation consciousness of Human 2.0. So this is the application of insertive behavior, which is to say, I will insert these behaviors in my nowness. They will become the palette of my behavioral choice. The other half of this equation is the resistive behaviors, and these are withdrawing and stopping behaviors that support separation and deception. These are active resistances. Saying no to behaviors of your own and others, without judgment. Again, whether you operate in the insertive or resistive behavioral mode, you are affecting the whole. You either support oneness and equality, the I am, we are, or you support separation and deception, also known in our reality as the status quo. The starting point of behavior or expression is in the now. This is the creative nerve center. Every single now is a potential to support oneness and equality in this world, and help birth the Human 3.0 and the sovereign integral network.
How long? I mean, how long will this take?
The Grand Portal enables the sovereign integral network. The wingmakers suggest that around 2080, conditions should be ideal for this Human 3.0 to reveal itself. But they also stipulate that it could happen sooner or later.
Why wouldn't Anu, since he's God, simply stop it? Or, if Marduk could program with such amazing accuracy, how could Human 3.0 even come about? Unless he wanted it.
There have been several interventions. While Anu and his Syrian cohorts were focused on the Human 1.0 and 2.0 uniforms, they didn't pay as much attention to the interaction of Earth and the human vessel. Earth is an anomaly in itself. Remember that the Earth's gravitational fields interact with all life. Even non-physical beings, if they get close enough, and stay long enough, can be materialized in this plane of existence. Anu did not want to be materialized in this dimension, and he could only appear on this plane of existence for short times, maybe a day or two. In this time, our time, right now, the Anunnaki cannot enter this plane. They're locked out. The Earth plane is too dense. So that is one reason. Anu's ability to interact directly with his creation has been curtailed. The second intervention point is that non-physical beings have woken up to this issue of enslavement. They see how it affects everyone. It was permitted in part because the Anunnaki and their alliance partners were strong and threatening to many other races and beings. However, this notion of enslaving infinite beings, as a concept or inception point, was infecting all of existence. It was a fear-based, separation-based idea that beings eventually began to see as a degenerative force to existence. The native state of existence, which includes space-time and non-space-time expressions, is oneness and equality. Obviously, enslavement is only possible in a separation-based paradigm. The third intervention point is the wingmakers. They were the part of humanity also known as the Atlanteans, but even before the Atlantean race, they existed in a pure state genetic template, and eventually these genetics were used by Anu to create, in part, the Human 1.0 and Human 2.0. although with the 2.0 version, it was less pure, because Anunnaki and Syrian genetics were introduced, among others. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the wingmakers, as a future expression of Human 3.0, have entered our space-time and have begun to crack open this prison reality. The fourth intervention point is each of us practicing the sovereign integral process.
I presume the Incunabula and Illuminati have something to say about this whole Human 3.0 plan. Am I right on that?
Yes. The triad of power, however you want to define it, in terms of titles, is programmed to create their own Human 3.0. This version will be predicated on the convergence of technology in support of biological enhancements that make the human vessel even more of a welcoming environment for the functional implants. The goal is to make an infinite human on the earth plane. Infinite by virtue of immortality. The fusion of human and technology, or what some call transhumanism, is the goal. So, Human 3.0 for the triad of power is very different from Human 3.0 SI, as envisioned by the wingmakers. You see, transhumanism is separation. It says we are frail, weak, finite, brutish, diseased, incomplete. All of these ideas for technological implants and cognitive enhancement were parts of the Advanced Contact Intelligence Organization, ACIO agenda.
The ACIO was building Human 3.0?
Yes, certain key aspects of the transhumanist model. Not the SI version. You see, the whole idea of transcending is linked to the inception point of separation. It is the I Am Supreme model. It says, the human vessel can be, and should be, enhanced in such a way that the functional implants can live forever. There are several things missing, according to the wingmakers. 1. The unconscious mind cannot contain the data streams of a continuous species, and 2. The search for who we are, as the true source of life, will only be further obscured by technological enhancement. The realization of I am, we are, is not a technological realization, nor is its manifestation accelerated by, or through technology, at an individual level. It is a self-learning and behavioral process. Nothing more, nothing less.
So transhumanists want to transcend human suffering, ignorance, and mortality through technology, and the ACIO was providing some of the technology to do this, but who would have access to the technology?
The elite, of course. It would only accelerate and accentuate the separation. It is simultaneous empowerment and disempowerment. The economic models for the transhumanist diffusion, as it was called in the Labyrinth group, were not widely considered. The Incunabula being the only exception.
You mean they actually wanted to build a plan that made the transcending technologies available to everyone?
They looked at it from two angles. 1. If the technology could be introduced at birth, it would mitigate the cost issues of healthcare and education, offsetting diffusion costs. But it would have to be a government-implemented service. No private company could secure sufficient trust. So a critical component was to make the United Nations, the credible world organization that could introduce transhumanism to the global stage. The second angle was to allow class distinctions and free markets to eventually make the technology irresistible to everyone, and then allow government subsidies to bring down the cost sufficiently to enable its dispersion. All of this sounds very altruistic, but the quality of the technologies would be variant. Elite classes would be able to secure higher quality implantations coupled to more responsive genetics. This would simply be a human civilization that would be attempting to purge discontent and disobedience in favor of participation in a ruled system of government by elite transhumans. Technology will evolve from external impersonal to external personal to integrated personal to internal personal. Transhumanism is the last phase, and it is the phase that the elite are moving to. The internal personal is based on exactly the same paradigm of what is now the human condition, namely, humans have a programmed interface that's integral to their human body, and is powered by the infinite source of which they truly are. Humans are unwittingly trying to be untrue to themselves. It's part of the program, according to the wingmakers. Humanity will play God to itself. It will try to engineer a better human and a better civilization. It will do this because it can imagine how humanity can save itself through simple behaviors, and the realization that these behaviors can make. They will do it because they are programmed to become integrated with technology. This is the path that the wingmakers seek to avert. They write that human beings are complete if they can step out of their consciousness frameworks and realize what is actually powering their systems. their artificial realities, their programmed existence. The integration of technology internally will only make this realization more difficult.
I think you said on Saturday that there were prophecies of a synthetic race overtaking humanity. This sounds like what those prophets saw.
15 felt the same way. 15 is the genius leader of the Advanced Contact Intelligence Organization ACIO in the Labyrinth Group. He never assumed that they were off-planet aliens. These prophets could have seen human 3.0 transhumanists in some distant timeline and assumed they were alien.
What about the military force?
As you can imagine, this is where it will be tested first. There is a whole field of psychological technology that has laid the groundwork for the real internal technologies to flow into the military. It will be released there initially, so it can be properly defended for testing purposes. Once it's proven there, it will converge with the integrated personal technology programs of the corporate elite.
When you say integrated personal, what do you mean exactly?
Miniaturization of the technology will enable it to adorn the body. It will not be internal yet, but it is part of the human body, like clothing, glasses, watches, and jewelry.
Bear with me, but let me see if I have this straight. Human 1.0 was a creation of a godlike being.
No. Anu is the same as us, or the Atlanteans. He was no more intelligent or godlike. He was deceptive. That is the only distinction.
Okay, but Anu created Human 1.0, and then found them to be too similar to his own capabilities, and feared they would one day figure out that they were Atlanteans, enslaved by the Anunnaki. And he was worried about the consequences of that discovery. So, he wiped them clean with a planetary flood.
According to the wingmakers, the flood was one part of the extinction program, but there were also nuclear weapons that were discharged on the planet, most of which have been explained away as meteorite impacts. But the wingmakers write that these were advanced weapons used against human populations that had avoided the flood.
Okay. In whatever way Human 1.0s were eliminated from the planet, they were replaced by Human 2.0, and these included upgrades like self-reproduction and more advanced programming. And central to this programming was the notion that Anu was God, and would return to his creation. Correct?
Yes.
And the next upgrade to Human 2.0 branches out like a fork in the road. One version of Human 3.0 goes down the path of technology integration, or transhumanism. The other version, 3.0 SI, is a more organic process of using behaviors to support this process of becoming a Human 3.0 or sovereign integral, and then becoming part of a network of these sovereign integrals. Is that correct?
You have the general idea, yes.
And the Triad of Power wants Human 3.0 to go down the path of technology integration, because that is how they are programmed, to emulate their god, Anu. Right?
Yes.
So it's kind of like humanity sits at a crossroads. On the one side is the Triad of Power, that is programmed to develop Human 3.0 as a cyborg, I guess, and the other side is the future existence of humanity urging us to do it internally, one person at a time, through a behavioral process. I guess the part that's missing for me is the role of the Gram Portal, which remains unclear. I thought it was a technology that proved the existence, the irrefutable scientific existence of the human soul. How does that figure into this?
There are humans here who are designers of the new unconscious mind that will bridge human populations everywhere on the planet to feel and express equality and oneness. It will connect humanity and the I am, we are, consciousness, instead of the separation consciousness. It will not be based on hierarchy. The deception is coming down. One of the things that was never disclosed in the materials, including my previous 4 interviews, is that certain information was to be withheld. Some information was even veiled to not raise the ire of the Triad of Power. This information, this interview, will not be disclosed in the same timeline as the previous 4.
Why?
The designers of the new unconscious layer of the Human 3.0 are on the planet now. They are doing some of the preparation required to move humanity, who will be sitting at the fork in the road, in the next 40-50 years, to choose the I am, we are, path.
So I can't release this interview?
No. When it's time, I will contact you.
You said some of the information was veiled. In what way?
The wingmakers will only release some of the information now, in 1998. That is the information that will not feel too revolutionary, too radical. It needed, in their own words, to cross into the human interface and activate a willingness to listen to their voice. For example, They used the term wingmakers to describe themselves, knowing it would have a connection to the angel construct.
But you said the wingmakers were a future representation of human beings, presumably, from this disclosure, version 3.0. Right?
Yes, but there is programming within the human interface, where the functional implants are networked as a system that will tune out certain information. A person will hear it, but they